Hey guys, it's Megan Aller in sales at First American Title here in Denver, Colorado. I've had a lot of questions that have come up recently about the inverted yield curve that appeared on August 14th. Now, the inverted yield curve ended up being a preceding warning back to 1950, anytime that led us into a recession. The inverted yield curve is something that gave us a heads up. Now, the inverted yield curve that we're talking about in this potential case is that short-term returns were yielding higher returns than those that were long-term. And so this time we were talking about the 10-year Treasury note, okay? And so what happens is investors get spooked when they're concerned about heading into a primary recession, and they start to move their assets from long-term investments to short-term investments so that they're able to recoup those funds and hope that they're not going to be going into a recession where they could lose a lot of money. Now, where this term came from was from The Big Short, the movie that came out going over the Great Recession that we went through from 2008 to 2012. This was the primary indicator that the gentleman used to predict that forthcoming recession that everyone else seemed to miss. Now, this has happened every year since this has happened every time since 1950 that this inverted yield curve has appeared prior to a recession hitting the marketplace. Now, this inverted yield curve doesn't predict the length or the severity of a downturn. It's coincidentally coming up prior to that happening. Yield curves tend to correct themselves prior to going into a recession, and it typically indicates that a recession is 18 to 24 months out. There have been cases in the past where the yield curve inverts, but a recession never comes to fruition. Now, it's important that we talk about the length and the severity of the downturn that we went through last time versus the market conditions leading into it this time. So let's talk about our distressed market starting back in 2008. Now, the reason why we had such an incredibly distressed market was those lending conditions from 1998 up until about 2006 were 100% or more financing, stated income loans with 0% down. Now, those lending conditions created a market where no appreciation is happening in our marketplace. People aren't building equity in their houses. Any shift or change in the value of a home is going to instantly put those homeowners upside down on their properties. And that's what led us into short sales, foreclosures, and HUD homes. And at the worst part of our market, heading into 2009 and 2010 in Metro Denver, it was just over 50% of our homes either classified as a short sale, a foreclosure, or a distressed property. So what makes it different this time? Headed into our market of 2019, a 5 to 10% down payment is very standard. It's also taking a lot more proof in order to qualify for those loans. The other thing that we've really enjoyed was enhanced appreciation rates. Now, we've been appreciating in our market anywhere between 9 to 12% year over year for 7 years in a row. Even though our appreciation is slightly lower this year, if you've owned your home for 2 years or more, it's likely, if you have not gone through a refinance, that you have at least 20% of an equity cushion in your house. Now, again, people that have lived in their homes longer and haven't refinanced and pulled that equity out, you have a bigger equity cushion. Whereas we had no equity cushion back in the last market run-up, this time we have a very strong equity cushion. On top of that, we also lack the supply that's required to create a market in a bubble. This graph behind me shows the relationship between supply and demand. Heading into the recession back in 2005, we had a surplus of 6 months or more inventory in our marketplace. That means that there were more sellers than buyers in the market. Sellers competed against each other, driving their prices down. Buyers offered less than their asking price, and that's what created the recession of the bubbles bursting, prices falling here in Metro Denver. As of now, we still sit at 1.6 months worth of inventory. Before we can get into bubble conditions, we have to get back to that 6 months worth of inventory or more, where sellers then compete against each other, driving those prices down. Now, in September, it is true that we have more inventory at this point in the year than we do at other points in the year. So this is typically a bigger concern as we go into the fourth quarter, trying to figure out where that relationship between supply and demand exists. Just to give you some perspective, I've also taken these numbers for the relationship between supply and demand and broken them out into price ranges. To give you some perspective, the $1 to $3 million market today in Metro Denver has a 4.4 month supply of inventory, which is a screaming luxury market. When we were going into the recession back in October of 2007, that number was 1 to 126. That meant that we had a 10.5-year supply of inventory at that price point. I'll take 4.4 months worth of inventory any day. Now, if you want to have a better representation of where we would need to be concerned about a recession, the blue bar in this graph represents how much inventory we have. Yellow is that cutoff point where we would get into a place where we would have that 6-month supply of inventory. As you can see, we've been far short of it at this point in the market versus where we were back in 2005, 6, 7, and 8, and where our prices really fell here in Metro Denver was between 2010 and about halfway through 2011. Okay. Now, again, it's that relationship between supply and demand that dictates what happens with prices. And at this point, the relationship between supply and demand does not dictate that we're in a bubble. Now, if you have any more questions about this, I hope that you'll reach out to me so that we can have a conversation. I'm happy to share with you some of the various real estate blogs and economic forums that I participate in to make sure that I'm up to speed on what's happening with some of these more pressing financial concerns. If I can be of assistance to you, all of my contact information is at the bottom, and we hope to see you again soon at our closing tables. I hope you'll turn back in next week for our weekly market update. We'll be showing some of the map technology that I've been working in. We'll see you soon.